In the meantime, President Bola Tinubu has signed a budget of 28.78 trillion for the 2024 fiscal year. The president will return to the Aso Rock Villa from his Utah holiday in Lagos, conducted a brief ceremony to sign the inaugural budget of his administration. The event was witnessed by top government officials, including President of the Senate, Senator Godswill Akpabio, Speaker of the House of Representatives, Tajuddin Abbas, Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy, Wale Edun, Minister of Budget and Economic Planning, Atiku Abubakar, and the National Security Advisor, Nuhu Ribadu. The National Assembly had on Saturday last week passed the 2024 appropriation bill, increasing its size from the initially proposed 27.5 trillion by President Bola Tinubu to 28.7 trillion naira. The budget size saw an increase of 1.2 trillion naira.
The budget is a budget of renewed hope. It's anchored on reducing the deficit and increasing capital expenditure, particularly in our priority areas. The approved 2024 budget that we just approved now achieve both objectives. It contains a very good increase in the capital side, a reduction in recurrent expenditure, and it brought down the deficit from 6.11% to 3.88%.
In other news, the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission is conducting a comprehensive review and investigation into foreign exchange utilization in the last 10 years, which involves scores of leading companies in the country that may have benefited from FX allocation from the Central Bank of Nigeria. Some of the outstanding names among that list include Dangote Group, BUA, TGI, and Flour Mills. It is understood that the companies in question may not have committed any infractions, as there were yet to be proof of their involvement in criminal activities. On the FX probe, it was gathered that the EFCC had written to the 52 companies, directing them to supply documents supporting the allocation and utilization of foreign currencies to them in the last 10 years. I'm now being joined here by Johnson Chukwu, financial analyst and founder and managing director of Cowrie Asset Management Company Limited, for a quick scrutiny of the 2024 budget and the EFCC Forex investigations. Good to have you on the program. Hi, Chief Johnson Chukwu. Happy New Year.
Happy New
First
Year.
time
Happy New Year, His Excellency.
Well, you know, last week I was looking for you. I wanted your input also on the budget, being a subject area expert. So it's good you are back from, should I say the village?
Yes, I'm coming from the village.
Okay. So welcome back to
Don't
Lagos.
I look like somebody that's coming from the village?
You said what?
I look like somebody who's coming from the village.
No, you're a cosmopolitan Nigerian. No. But it's good to touch base with home.
Oh, absolutely.
And good to have you back in one piece. Okay, now, President Tinubu calls it budget of renewed hope. And the subject is still a living subject. Analysts are still looking at different sides of it, the benchmark, the highlights, the omissions. What do you think?
Ruben, my take on the budget is that it's going to be difficult to implement. And principally because the assumptions which premise the budget look a bit unrealistic. One of the core assumptions is that crude production will be about 1.78 million barrels a day. If you look at the past, at the end of the first 9 months of last year, the average crude production was about 1.33 million barrels a day. So you're talking about an increase of more than 400,000 barrels a day. And again, we're also going into new forward transactions where we're selling crude upfront and collecting the money, which means the free crude that will be available for earning or for transfers to the federation account will be reduced by the portion that is now committed on the Afrexim transaction. But beyond that, you also look at historically, what have we done in terms of revenue? At the end of the first 9 months of last year, total federal government revenue was 8.65 trillion naira. Now we are projecting about 19 trillion naira in the new year. So where would that come from? And I think from all indications, because the truth is that if you don't achieve the revenue projections, it becomes impossible to achieve some components of the expenditure projections, which is what happened in the first 9 months of last year. Total budgeted capital expenditure actually implemented at the end of the first nine months of last year was only 1.47 trillion naira. So now we're budgeting 9 trillion. And you have the current expenditure about 17 trillion. So if you have the current expenditure of 17 trillion, excluding that's debt service of 8.27 trillion and non-debt service recurrent expenditure about 8.6 trillion, then you are dealing with a 17 trillion that you consider as non-discretionary, you must pay. So before we begin to spend on capital projects, we must meet debt service and the government overhead.
Well, I mean, one of the major things in that budget is the benchmark of 800 naira to the dollar. And yet on Friday, at the NAFEM window, it was about 895. But in the parallel market, it was 1,200 to the dollar. Some people are even saying, look, that 1,200 to the dollar is going to go as high as 2,000 naira to the dollar. So what do we do to stabilize the Forex? Because that may be another regard in which, you know, the approved budget is missing the mark.
No, you know, when it comes to the conversion rate for crude for foreign exchange in the budget, is to the advantage of the government. Because what they have done is that by using 800 naira, knowing that the NAFEX window has actually in recent times traded above 800 naira. So in effect, they're going to have an exchange rate gain or exchange gain, which will be shared to all the tiers of government. So in terms of projection, I think what they did was use a conservative exchange rate. Because prior to Friday, when the exchange rate closed at 800, the preceding day, the Thursday, it was about 1,030 naira to a dollar. And if you remember, on 28th of December, it was 1,403 naira, which they intentionally strengthened to about 907. So for year-end closing. So in terms of exchange rate, the exchange rate today is not determined by market forces. In as much as the central bank says the Nigerian autonomous foreign exchange market is market-driven, because central bank is what you call the market maker, is virtually the sole supplier of in the market. So they determine what price. They actually determine what price the market will open and what price it will close. So in terms of exchange rate, I think what we are going to see is amount accruing to the federation will be higher by if the exchange is not a factor. Because exchange is not a factor. I've mentioned the issue of crude production. So the question is, what do we need to do to stabilize the exchange rate? The way we've gotten to today is not going to be a short-term measure, because some of those key things we need to do are not things we can easily do overnight. I give you, there are three major components of foreign exchange into the economy. One is export of crude. I had mentioned earlier that we borrowed about 3 billion and we have sold crude upfront. And that means that that portion of the crude is no longer available, it's no longer part of free crude, so it will no longer lead to a creation into federation account or reserve, because we're taking that upfront. But beyond that, crude production has not really stabilized. In October, crude production was about 1.3 million barrels a day. In November, it dropped to 1.24 million barrels a day. So you see that level of fluctuation. Until we have a substantial improvement in crude production, foreign exchange earnings from our export will not lead to any stabilization of exchange rate. The other component is capital importation. You saw the capital importation decline to about $654.65 million in the third quarter of last year. So that's also indication that it's also a trend, because we started the first quarter with 1,130,000 $1,130 million in the first quarter. Second quarter, $1,030 million. And third quarter, $654.65 million. That is supposed to be a stopgap measure to fill any shortfall in our foreign exchange earnings. But that's also declined. So if we expect that foreign capital flow will help us stabilize the exchange rate, it's not likely to happen in the immediate. The third leg is as it relates to diaspora remittances. And I don't see any sudden change in diaspora remittances to fill the gap created by low export earnings from crude and low capital importation. And that's why I say that the issue of stabilizing the exchange rate is not a short-term thing. But the question is, what do we need to do? We need to focus on what we call endogenous factor. That's factor within our control, and that will come from our ability to improve crude production. If we can improve crude production to about 2 million barrels a day, then we should have foreign exchange earning from crude export that will help us stabilize the exchange rate. That's the surest bet for us to stabilize the exchange rate. The other windows are outside our control, because until you clear the arrears of unmet demand due to foreign investors, they are not likely going to be very aggressive in our investing in our assets. Until you have stability in the exchange rate, they won't be aggressive. Until you have restoration of liquidity in your foreign exchange market. And these factors have to be addressed from export of our primary export product, which is crude.
Okay, in terms of the assumptions, the approved budget says target inflation 21.40%. What is that optimism based upon, considering that at the moment, as at end of November, inflation rate in Nigeria was 28.22%, and then projected GDP growth rate of 3.76% in a country where, except we have double-digit growth rate, projecting 3.76. How does that budget help economic growth in real terms?
Okay, let's start from the projected GDP growth rate. In the first 9 months of last year, we saw the GDP grow at 2.31% the first quarter, 2.51% second quarter, and 2.54%
everything
third
blamed
quarter.
on exogenous factors.
Okay, so the growth, what would propel growth? You have to look at the structure of the economy. The major contributors to the economy are agriculture. Agriculture account for almost more than 24% of the GDP. So if agricultural sector is growing at a very slow growth rate, it will dampen the growth or drag down the growth rate because of the size of agriculture. The other major contributor is telecommunication sector. That one has continued to record strong growth. Well, of course, we've also seen a declining trend in its growth. Then you move to the manufacturing sector. Trade sector. Trade sector has turned positive, but the growth is still weak. Then you look at, and the trade sector will be constrained by lack of foreign exchange and slowdown in consumption. And then the third element is the manufacturing sector. Then before you go to construction industry. Construction industry comment can stimulate construction industry. So you can see a material growth in the construction industry. But if you don't have substantial growth in agricultural sector, telecommunications, so like I said, telecommunications is doing quite reasonably well. Trade sector and the manufacturing sector, you are not going to have material growth in the GDP. So I need to hear what strategies does government have to stimulate faster growth in the agricultural sector, which is the largest contributor to the GDP. As it stands today, we're dealing with so many levels, high level of insecurity in the country, which is because of the nature of agricultural activities, is still subsistent farming. So you need the woman and the man to go with the hoe to the farms. If they're being chased around by insurgents or non-gunmen, as you have in the southeast, insurgents in the north, then it's difficult for you to have a growth in agriculture. So that's why I said the GDP growth rate they have at 3.76%. It is not outside the range of growth that this economy can witness. But we need to address the issue of insecurity that's affecting the agricultural sector. We need to address the challenges of the manufacturing sector, and we need to address liquidity or FX availability to the trade sector. If those sectors are growing, we should have reasonable growth rate.
Okay.
Then,
please go ahead.
Okay. Then, on the inflation rate of 21%, I believe that inflation rate will moderate to some extent, but I don't know if it will moderate to 21%. It's very simple. The factor that are propelling inflation are pass-through effect of Naira depreciation or devaluation. You just mentioned that some analysts are saying Naira could get to 2,000 Naira. If it does that, the transmission effect will hit inflation rates. The other factor is government borrowing from the central bank. We've seen the federal government went to the National Assembly to seek secretariation of 7.3 trillion Naira in a single year after we secretariated 22.7 trillion Naira. That is liquidity injected into the economy. That's money printed into and pushed into the economy. That's not bad by product of it, and that leads to liquidity suffix that drives inflation. So if you don't deal with these things, in as much as the base effect will lead to some level of moderation, but I don't think it would get to 21%.
Okay, one more question, and then we'll move on to other issues, which is about the absence of breakdown in terms of revenues and expenditures concerning government-owned enterprises. If you look at that budget, yes, we don't know how much NEMASA, for example, is going to earn and, bring in. The same thing with Nigerian Ports Authority, the same thing with other government-owned enterprises. And this has historically been the case over the years. Why is it that the budget year after year is always silent on the revenues and expenditures of government-owned enterprises?
Those are the questions the National Assembly should be asking. Ideally, these government-owned enterprises should present their budget as standalone entities, which are now incorporated into the national budget. If they had presented their budget to the National Assembly, other subcommittees of National Assembly, that budget should have given a detailed breakdown of their revenues and expenditure. And what you now integrate to the national budget will be the summary of their revenues and expenditure. But I don't think they are presented to the National Assembly. That's what the missing gap. Because it's like saying the accounts or the budget of subsidiaries must also be presented in what the parent company is presenting. It should just have been presented to the board of the subsidiaries and then integrated as subheads, not the details. So what we should be asking in the National Assembly, they should request for the budgets of the individual government-owned enterprises and then scrutinize those budgets to be sure that they are in tandem with the competencies or capabilities or potentials of those government-owned enterprises.
Okay. Finally, on that subject and briefly, concerns have been expressed about the replication of items already covered in the 2023 supplementary budget. For example, the renovation of the residential quarters of the president and the vice president and some other details. Why the replication of items already covered in the 2023 supplementary budget?
Interestingly, my response would ordinarily be the questions you be asked the Minister of National Planning. But the reality is that if we are a serious country, given our parlous economic financial condition, we need to adopt zero-based budgeting, where every expenditure item is freshly justified based on the value that is to bring into the nation. So if you have duplications or replications, because we're adopting incremental budgeting. So what you have, this year they budgeted 2 billion, and then next in the supplementary budget they have another 5 billion in the full budget. You've not asked, have we implemented this, and what value did you get? And then do we really need to put more money in that project? Is it a priority for the country given our current situation? That is what is missing. And unfortunately, the arm of government that should do that scrutiny is happy with approving whatever is brought to them.
Okay, Chukwu, let's move on to the other subject I cited in the introduction, which is the EFCC probing about 52 conglomerates, right? Do you think it's a smart move, or this is just showmanship? And what signal does this send to the investing and business community?
Okay, Dr. Apati, my opinion about the approach of Nigerian law enforcement agencies when it comes to investigation is it's like a name and shame without necessarily being detailed enough to achieve conviction. If you have to investigate companies on the fact that they were located in foreign exchange, the records in Central Bank will be detailed enough to provide that. What exchange did they pay? Because for every allocation, there would be a Naira receipt, unless if the allocation was not utilized. So you need to know which account did they pay from, and what rate did they pay, what was the ruling rate, what was the justification for that allocation. You don't need to adopt a Gestapo approach to go and storm a corporate organization and say you are investigating. These are financial. Even these are financial transactions that have audit trail. You don't even need to stay out of your office. The EFCC has access to use the biometrics to spool every account of the signatories. And that way you can carry out the detailed investigation. Then if there's need prosecution, it's only at the point of prosecution it comes to the public knowledge. The concept that we will now list companies and now allege they have committed crime and then start the investigation after allegation. We must also recognize that some of the companies have become what you call, they have become ambassadors of the country. So if you end up shaming them, destroying their reputation, and not succeed in convicting them and realize that you have made a mistake, you know what you have done? You would have subtracted from their brand equity and their reputation outside the country. And other countries who may not have been privileged to know that they were not convicted might have aversion to dealing with them. Is that what they want to achieve? So I think when it comes to financial crime, of allegation of financial crime, the audit trail, the investigating agency should go through and be able to determine whether there's a crime has been committed or not before they go to court. What we should hear is that this person is being prosecuted in court, and not that we have a truckload of security agencies storming an office. What are they going to do? You're not going to arrest a drug runner or an armed robber. So I think we need to do away with that, because sometimes they don't look at the totality of the implication of their actions. At the end of the day, we are ending up presenting a horrible image of the country when we keep going, alleging crime against people we have not thoroughly investigated. And in many of those instances, you don't end up with successful prosecution.
Okay, the Dangote Group, for example, has issued a statement in which they said they asked for more time to provide the documents that the EFCC requested for, and they provided the documents. They were not given enough time. Nonetheless, they provided documents. And then in spite of that, the EFCC still insisted on coming to their office, and which they did, made a big show out of it. Now, what you are saying is that the EFCC shouldn't have gone public with these investigations, because there is already an audit trail in the custody of the central bank. So do you think that the EFCC, in spite of these reactions, will still make more revelations with regard to Forex investigation?
Dr. Albert, for me, it's not about revelation. The issue is that, do they have an ironclad case? If they do, go to court and test your case. It's not going to be in the public domain. What you end up doing is that you end up creating a public opinion that convicts an innocent person. And you can't erase it from the mind of the person, the public. And the public goes about with the impression that this entity is a criminal entity. And that affects their engagement in business transactions anywhere in the world. I have been an advocate that, let's adopt, do you know, some of the things they say, look, if the Federal Bureau of Investigation in America charges you to court, you are almost 100% sure you'll be convicted. Because before they will even approach you, they would have concluded their investigation on you. Before they come for you and ask you to make a statement, every statement you're making, they have a comprehensive evidence against you. So that's what we should do. If we have not learned it, we need to go to them and study what goes on in current practice of investigation of financial transactions. This approach of I will arrest you, apparently before the media, because what they're doing, they're apparently coming before the media. And they're apparently before the media, then after the investigation. We need to stop it henceforth. Okay. It is not in the interest of the country.
Will you make the same case about how the special investigator of the CBN has gone about his work? There was a report released in which there were several indictments and also recommendations of processes that government should follow, including recommendation, for example, that some people should be prosecuted, and also that a bank like Union Bank should be, to use a familiar phrase, be renationalized. Will you make the same case for the way the CBN investigation has gone?
What I would say is that the special investigator, the special CBN investigation was actually more discreet in the course of his investigation. I mean, we were not hearing snippets in the media on whatever he was working on. Yes, the final report he published was brought to the media. I wouldn't know whether it should come to the media until it becomes a white paper, or it should come to the media before becoming a white paper, because such thing will now influence the judgment of those who are going to review that document. But I've also heard comments, there are some areas where the investigation may not have been as thorough as it should be. But having the concluding investigation, the key thing is that some of the recommendations will be tested in court. Some of the recommendations require some other additional level of legal engagement, either in terms of, because if you talk of a bank like, you can't just go and revoke their license, withdraw the acquisition because you are not infringing on property rights. I'm not saying that the process of acquisition or not was right or not. I'm just saying that if anything has to happen on that, it may have to go to court. So the key thing is that the report is out. It's left for the presidency to determine what they want to do with the report. And I'm sure the practice in Nigeria is that the report has to be reviewed and then accepted. And then if maybe a white paper issued, and then now becomes a legal document for implementation. But like I said, that approach is even more subtle than what we're dealing with, where allegations made against people, truckload of uniformed officers at some of the person's office to seek for documents you may not see in physical form. Because if you're talking about banking transactions, somebody can approve a payment electronically, and there's no paper in the office. So why would you want to ask for those papers? If there are correspondences, the central bank should have some of the correspondences. If they don't have, you ask the company to send me the correspondence. The correspondence you have, which evidencing this approval. So I think we need to just, like I said, the name and shame, we need to stop it.
Okay. Well, you use the word acquisition. And I recall that the CBN governor, Yemi Cardoso, during the bankers' dinner, the last bankers' dinner, was hinting at the recapitalization of banks. What do you think of that suggestion? Should that be by way of public offering or via mergers and acquisitions, M&A?
Okay, I think the first point would be, what's my opinion as it relates to the recapitalization? And like you said, I'm an analyst. And what we do is that...
I'm also a player in the industry.
Yes, I'm also a player in the industry. The first thing you look at, you say, what are the assumptions on which you base your deduction on? The primary assumption of the CBN governor is that Nigeria will become a $1 trillion economy in 3 years. I think by 2027, is that right? Which is 3 years away. That Nigeria will become a $1 trillion economy, and that the banks today are not capitalized enough to finance a $1 trillion economy. And my approach is that, what is the size of the Nigerian economy today? The Nigerian economy is less than 400 billion, or just about 400 billion, because with the devaluation we've seen in the exchange rate, if you now compute the GDP in dollar terms, we are likely going to be less than 400 billion. What is the growth rate of the GDP? If you look at the projections based on the medium-term expenditure framework, you have 2.4, 2.5. The growth rate of the GDP at even 5% will not give you a 500 billion economy in 3 years. So the assumption on which the need for banks to recapitalize is fallacious. It's based on wrong premise. And so if it's based on wrong premise, then why would you want banks to accumulate capital base to finance an economy that's say 400 billion? And then you want them to have capital requirement base of 1 trillion economy. Where would they invest it in? So that's the question you ask yourself. Are we likely going to be at the current growth rate, a $1 trillion economy in 10 years? The answer is no. In 15 years, the answer is no. So why do I have to bring forward a capital that I can invest in other sectors of the economy? Because the economy requires capital. So if we have that level of funding this economy, why don't we invest in other sectors of the economy that we can catalyze economic growth? If you put in the banking system, they wouldn't have the businesses, the deals to finance with that level of capital. And if they don't have those deals to finance, you're going to have a decline in earnings per share. So in terms of return to equity investors, it will decline to the point that nobody wants to hold banking shares. So we need to first interrogate the assumption. So if the assumption is fallacious, then the deductions are, no matter how logical they are, will also be false.
Yeah. Okay, final question, so that I can let you go. Now, let's go back to where we started from, the budgeting process. Now, we tend to focus more on federal budgets. Every year, the national budget, this is what the National Assembly has done, this is what the president has proposed. But we hardly talk about budgets at the subnational level. We just ignore the states, the governors do what they like, and they go to the houses of assembly that are under their near absolute control. And nobody interrogates these budgets. In fact, one governor, who shall remain nameless, once presented his budget in this country within 7 minutes, and he took the gavel himself and passed the budget himself. And nothing happened. Why is it that we're not focusing on the states?
Your Excellency, you know you call me chief, you also Your Excellency. The reality is that at the subnational level, the budgetary process is basically has become just a matter of routine. Because the rigor that goes into budgeting does not apply at the state level. So, and that's why most people, when you look at the state budget, I mean, if you remember one of the states, I think that was Cross River State. They had a budget of 1 trillion naira or so at some point, and they asked the governor how he was going to fund it. And I think he said it's going to be digital money. There is a digital budget that will be funded with digital money. So is that what you want to integrate and begin to interrogate? You'll be wasting your time. The reality is that the budgeting process, apart from a few states who are the exceptions, are no matter of annual ritual that to conform with the constitutional requirement. And you see a governor, he sit down here and he will approve an expenditure. And then it will be implemented immediately. The question is that, is it in the budget? Nobody will ask that question.
So, but you say some states are exceptions. Can you name some of those states?
Well, I think Lagos state government is relatively an exception. Currently, I'm also proud to say Abia state government under Dr. Lesotho is exception. And I think under El-Rufai, Kaduna was an exception. Edo State has been an exception under current Godwin Obaseki. So we hope we are going to see more of such exceptions, that instead of being an exception, they will be the rule. And others will have a compelling need to align with the best practice.
On that note, I would like to thank you very much, Chief Johnson Chukwu, for joining us on this Live This Sunday Talk Show today.